the crowdsourced city. I'm Neal Gorenflo. I'm the executive director of Shareable. Shareable is a nonprofit news organization, and we cover social innovation in cities, particular things that involve sharing and the commons. We just completed an 18-month project writing a book called Sharing Cities, Activating the Urban Commons. And it reflects through lots of case studies and model policies that a much bigger part of a city can be crowdsourced than what most people think. You know, from housing to transportation to job creation and much, much more. And also it kind of puts forward a philosophy that, and a belief really, that the health and vitality of a city count on this deepening and broadening public participation in city making. And I'd go one step further and say that rather than simply a facet of a city or a kind of niche, you know, crowdsourcing and crowdfunding, we might start thinking of this as the essence of city making, and that a city made for people, you know, and to push that even further, like that a city made for people is a development, but a city made by people working together is more of a home, right? And you know, this might be a particular challenge for new cities, and that's why I'm truly impressed by the panelists we have today. They're very accomplished, and it's a diverse panel. We have a mayor, we have 2 crowdfunding business operators, and a community organizer and designer. And with that, let's just dive right in. And you know, first I want to know a little bit more about you guys and what got you into this. Like, what was your motivation to get into crowdsourcing or crowdfunding? And Christopher, we can start with you.
Well, I was first elected mayor in my hometown 19 years ago, and one of my first things I noticed was no one was participating in anything. We'd have these public hearings and all these meetings and workshops, and nobody was coming. And I thought, we should go out in the neighborhood and have all these meetings there. Still, nobody would come. And then at one point, from another local government, the one just above us, the county said, you know, nobody comes to our meetings either. How do we get more citizens engaged in what we're doing? And it hit me. I'm not going to any of their meetings. Am I a disengaged citizen, or is the transaction cost, are we measuring citizen engagement by how much time and effort and attention it takes?
Right.
So I got really interested in, are there other ways for us to sense the signals that citizens are already sending, or that they can send on their own terms, on their own time, that aren't a function of government narcissism around, here's my question, please spend 3 hours on a Tuesday night not tutoring your daughter in algebra so I can get feedback on a zoning decision. But instead, how can we learn from citizens about their hopes and aspirations, their challenges, their pain points in ways that build on their own habits and behaviors and their needs and not just on ours? So our journey in my own city is how can we look at the crowd in a different way and not just as a group of individuals reducing all these decisions to public hearings.
I have a crowdfunding platform, and I really came to it pretty well because I moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and there I grew up as a developer doing really challenging community-based projects that was very difficult to get banks to come to the table. And I learned in those early years that financing is the key to getting anything done, and yet banks did not want to really help the cities and neighborhoods with projects that was sort of a key part of their transformation. So I really believe that crowdsourcing can offer that opportunity.
Right, so you really saw a need firsthand, right?
Yeah.
Chris?
Yeah, I started Spacehive 5 years ago. I used to be a journalist. I covered architecture planning for the Sunday Times newspaper. And the reason I got into it was because it just struck me that cities had a model of doing things, a sort of top-down way of changing places that was inadvertently stifling creativity and blocking out resource. And surely nobody would want it to be that way, but by relying almost solely on councils, municipalities, sometimes property developers, for financial and creative nourishment of our streets, our green spaces, our community buildings, which is so crucial to our quality of life and the health of local economies, we were actually blocking out the participation of the citizens and the businesses of that city who had, it struck me, a lot to give. And I was just really intrigued by the idea that we could start to apply this crowdfunding model, which at the time was being popularized by the likes of Kickstarter, to the urban environment, and use that as a way of providing a springboard for creativity, a springboard for innovation, so that people with good ideas for how to make their local places deliver better against their needs and aspirations could get them off the ground and attract the capital they need to make them happen. And so that's sort of why I started developing the concept, and we've been working with cities, businesses, and people to make it work since.
Mizah.
Right. Well, firstly, I'm truly honored to be here today and super excited to be able to share the stage with experienced practitioners and also thought leaders. So I was trained as an architect. I'm a participatory designer and also a community organizer. And my work is mostly based in Singapore. And if you're familiar with Singapore, we are very much driven by a top-down planning approach in doing design and planning. And that was when we were questioning what more can design or architecture do to better serve the community, right? And we wanted to kind of challenge in terms of how can we engage local communities in the design process. And that was really where we were coming from. And in a way, Singapore, we wanted to know how can we then work together with government agencies, town councils, estate managers, academics, and also professionals in creating and designing together with people and not just for people.
Right. Yeah. This is great because we have looking at this issue from multiple perspectives, and I'm also really curious about like what is driving this overall trend, and what is the kind of size of it and the scope of it. Chris, let's start with you on that, but I want to hear from others on that question as well.
Yeah. So from my perspective, in the UK, cities have faced very severe budget cuts over the last few years since the economic downturn. And so the business model, if you like, that underpinned the way that we fund the civic environment has been broken, and there is no prospect of it being restored in the near future. But that's not the only trend that's opened minds to the idea of doing civic improvement in a more collaborative way. There's also a general sense, a growing sense, I think, of frustration with democratic processes, both at a local level and nationally across the West. And people feel that the existing methods, I think, of participation in civic change are unsatisfactory. Going to a town hall meeting, raising your hand, maybe signing a petition, being on the receiving end of a public consultation by some property developer. For a lot of people, these just don't cut it. They don't really feel that they're able to change their neighborhood. And I think there's also an expectation with just the revolution in product design, technology, user experience, and so on. People just expect services to be a lot more accessible. And planning is this weird beast that has sort of defiantly resisted these trends of accessibility for a long time. So I think a lot of these things come together to create an opportunity for a more accessible, more transparent, more engaging way of doing civic improvement that actually a lot more people can participate in. And when you vote with your wallets, be it £2 or £20,000 for change in your neighborhoods, and then see it happen weeks later, that is a very different, much more visceral experience of engaging with the planning system than the one that people are used to.
Yeah, and you can see your neighbors are putting in too, right? Yeah. And what's the scope of this? Like, how many cities are doing this around the world? Do you have a sense for that? Anyone on the panel?
In the UK, there's 40 cities that we work with, so one joining every month. But it's not just in the UK. There are places around the world now that are adopting this approach, including Moscow. And then different forms of participation as well being experimented with in terms of participatory budgeting, the likes of Barcelona as well. So it's something that's catching on in lots of places.
Eve, anything to add? My
attorney likes to say that sometime soon Goldman Sachs is going to be purchased by a crowdfunding platform. I mean, I think I think that equity crowdfunding or investment crowdfunding is going to be enormous. It is an alternative source of financing that is sort of doing a couple of things. It's gathering people's funds into one enormous pool. It's giving them an opportunity to invest in a way they've never had before. I think it can be very, very big.
Right. Yeah. And you said we were in our prep. You said there was like some 20 plus competitors or something.
You know, equity crowdfunding has grown up since the Jobs Act was written in 2012 in the States. And so since then, I think about $350 billion has been raised just for real estate equity. There is a lot of
$350 billion.
Yeah.
And just for real estate.
And it's growing exponentially. Yeah.
Right.
So.
And that's the United States?
That's the United States,
okay.
I believe. Yeah.
Okay.
And then this next piece of it, regulation crowdfunding, which has barely begun, which is the piece that lets anyone over the age of 18 invest, that can be enormous too, because now instead of just accredited investors who are about 3% of the population, you can let 100% of the population invest, perhaps smaller amounts, but many, many more people.
Right. So it could be, go from 350 plus billion to...
I think it is still a very small niche market that not many people know about. And when it becomes mainstream, it's going to become enormous.
Mm-hmm. And what's the timescale for that, you think? Next couple years, 5 years?
As fast as we can go.
Yeah.
I don't know. I really don't know.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to predict the future.
Yes.
Mizah, so let's hear from your side. Like, from the community, like, what are you hearing from the people you work with about why this works for them?
Yeah, so I would like to kind of question, like, for example, where does crowdfunding falls under the ladder of participation, right? And we know that crowdfunding makes traditional citizen participation or engagement much easier, right? It's a lot wider, and definitely a lot more interesting and refreshing, right? But the thing is that for a city or a country like Singapore, when we are not used to asking for our ideas or even attending a town hall meeting, right? And we are very much used to the government solving problems for us, right? So we do have that mentality. So the question is, how do we get people to change the mindset? And one of the main criteria of how we can then implement citizen participation in the local context of Singapore is how might we then, what we call hack or disrupt the current traditional way of doing citizen engagement. And one of our main questions was that how might we demystify very complex issues like planning or architecture that make it easier for people to understand, right? And how might we also make participation a lot more fun and accessible? And that was our main approach when we first went out to people. So instead of getting people to come to us through town hall meetings or workshops, we go to where the people are.
Right.
And how do we then also make participation a lot more localized in Singapore's context, right? So what might work well in the UK or the US might not work so well within Singapore, because we know that participation is very much driven by the politics, social culture, right? And how do we then do that? So one of our main approach was we wanted to really make it fun and really make it easy and accessible for people to be involved in conversation and dialogue about local issues in the neighborhood, right?
Okay.
And also it's about asking the right questions, right? So our rule of thumb is whatever that goes out there into the community, right? A 12-year-old kid needs to be able to understand whatever that is being put out there. So that was one of our main criteria in making participation a lot more accessible. And we do know that there is a desire for people to want to participate in issues. It's just that there's no accessible platform for people to come together. And we were looking at making sure people who has no voice, meaning could be the seniors to the kids, to have a say in the dialogue and conversation about their local neighborhoods.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you too, like, how does traditional sort of community organizing, which is very much a face-to-face kind of thing, mesh with something like crowdsourcing or crowdfunding? Yeah,
so the thing is that I think that crowdfunding or crowdsourcing should not replace the traditional approach. It should still be there, definitely, but it should reinforce and supplement what is really being there. And I think for us, the power of talking to people, right, which is very basic. Because
like face-to-face, you mean, right?
Yeah, face-to-face, right? Because when we first started off, we realized that architects and planners do not understand the needs of the people. And we wanted to kind of go down to basics of just going on the ground and talking to people. Sounds very simple, but it's one of the most challenging things to do in that sense. So the work that we do at Participate in Design is still very much centered to going on the ground and talking to people, because we do believe in the power of stories. And as opposed to crowdfunding or crowdsourcing, which is very much an online platform, and I think that the why and the stories is a lot more difficult to kind of extract out from there. So I think I still do believe that in the power of going down and talking to people, and the power of stories to create a kind of empathy that we need to have as designers.
And a connection to place, right?
Yes, definitely.
And to each other. And Christopher, just to go deeper on that, I know. I heard that you have a kind of new pattern of engaging your community in this process, and I want to hear about it.
Well, I absolutely hate the normal way that we think about civic engagement. It doesn't. It's mathematically and logically a fallacy. This notion that we should go out and ask citizens, would you like to have a sustainable, eco-friendly, walkable downtown? And they say yes. And then we say, okay, now we're going to move to the next decision, which is, do you want to zone this parcel for apartments that are 27 stories high? Oh, no, I don't like crowding, so don't do that. Right, so, and then we say, well, and that street, should the street be the lane be 6 feet wide or 6.5 feet wide? They had no opinion about that 5 minutes ago, but now that we're asking, now they're giving the opinion. How about the sewer pipe underneath? Should that be 7 inches or 8 inches? When we subject every decision as though they're independent decisions, that there's no equal sign and a bunch of, that's a function of all these other decisions.
Yeah, they can't really see the big picture, right?
They can't see the big picture, but more importantly, that you cannot independently specify each of the independent variables and the dependent variable on the other side of the equation. Right, so when you do all the things...
Man, we need a whiteboard up here, don't we?
Right. At least in US cities, in civic engagement processes of all kinds, whether organized or not, citizens generally don't like density. They generally don't like not having free parking. They generally don't like any of the elements that are necessary to create what they fundamentally do want, which is a highly connected, walkable, livable city. And so we ask them, what do you want? And then we ask all the mechanics underneath. And we do what they say on the mechanics. So we don't build the density, we don't build the transit, we don't build any of the other stuff. Then they don't get the livable city. And they say, you know what? Government doesn't work. Government isn't a complete failure, and I don't trust it anymore. And so we built the seeds of our own demise by this obsession, this fiction that government decisions are somehow magically, unlike any other decisions in the world, completely independent of one another. So I think that this is as we've been thinking about crowdsourcing and crowdfunding, both of them independently, we're going to think, how can we get better at focusing on the dependent variable side of the equation? What is the outcome that we're trying to drive to, and stop manufacturing these kind of fake engagement questions along the way?
Right.
And I think that's where we're seeing, some hope. Crowdfunding is one of those elements, but I know we'll hear later today from Zen City, which is using more sophisticated analytics, sensing what people are saying in social media or in their service reports to us or other places, so we can get a sense, okay, what are you really feeling in your daily lives? To look at citizens as part of a design process and not simply treating opinion as the most important thing in the world. So I think fundamentally what I love about the crowdsourcing approach, and crowdfunding as an example, is that it shifts from the obsession about what is your momentary opinion to what action are you willing to take? What are you prepared to do to contribute to the goals that you have for yourself, for your neighborhood, and for your city? And it doesn't have to be a big step, but it's something, and cities are communities of actors fundamentally. Just taking a 20th century point of view about how a city works, which is that the mayor decides this will now happen, and now so in the 21st century, let's figure out how to give more people access to that decision making, is a lie. I don't make those decisions in the first place. I'm just setting the table and hoping that somebody will start a restaurant and that someone else will build a building and that a community group will plant a garden. I'm just hoping all those things will happen. I'm not the one deciding. And the fiction that we created in the 20th century was that was the case, and the most important thing in the world was go out and get as many opinions as possible about what my decision should be.
Right. Yeah, so offers an opportunity for a segue. Now, we've talked about the promise, the scope, the scale, why it's important to a certain degree. Let's dig in with some of the issues, some of the problems that you are facing in your work. Chris, what do you see as a fundamental tension or issue? For instance, how can this address this channel for engaging people, which a lot of times is digital? How can this address the inequality problem in cities?
Yeah, I mean, it's worth setting out very briefly how our form of crowdfunding is different to sort of crowdsourcing you talked about before, I think. Crowdsourcing is essentially about, in your context, soliciting ideas and opinions from people at scale to try and collect intelligence around decision making. And it can be useful or not, depending on how applied. What we do
Chris,
is
I'm actually trying to distinguish that. That's our old model of civic engagement. Crowdsourcing, what you're about to describe, I think, is exactly what I think I'm hopeful is part of the solution to the civic engagement problem.
Gotcha. So yeah, in our case, because the model is trying to provide an easy way for people to put forward specific projects that they want to do in their neighborhood, and then the crowdfunding allows them to be paid for in the most efficient way possible by getting contributions from friends and neighbors in the city all in one place. When you take a model like this and scale it up over a city like London, as we're doing at the moment, it presents lots of challenges. And one of them, from the city's perspective, is how do we ensure if we're going to suddenly mobilize all of these ideas and resources and have people and businesses constantly contributing to ideas that make the city better? How can we ensure that the projects that result are equitable, are fairly distributed amongst neighborhoods, and that properly reflect needs and aspirations of communities? And so one of the things we're working on is figuring out a strategy for incentivizing people to do projects in areas where there is perhaps a little bit more deprivation, or to do the sorts of projects that meet the mayor's strategic objectives, for example, for stimulating the economy in certain places. I really think the two models can work well together. You need leadership from the city, you need a strategy. Part of that strategy is to ensure fairness in the city and equality of investment. But you can also have a really vibrant ecology of ideas and funding collaborating alongside the city to actually deliver those projects at a local level too.
Just to dig in there a little bit, because you seem to have Spacehive has a unique relationship with the City of London. So how are you working together?
Yeah, I mean, we work with a lot of cities actually around the UK, but London's definitely the biggest. We started working together over the last 3 years, and the idea was to try and build a model for crowdsourcing ideas and then crowdfunding ideas to make the city better at scale. And what we've now got to, as a result of piloting this, is quite a confident place where the city is willing to really adopt this as the main channel through which they now solicit ideas and distribute and allocate resources to those sorts of projects.
For community-type projects, right?
Yeah, so this could be, we have everything from starting a new street market in a neighborhood to painting crazy murals all over some empty walls, turning an old coal line in South London into a high line, a bit like in New York, starting new festivals. There's a new project at the moment to build a new bridge across the Thames. So you have...
And this is stuff that's like off budget. It's not in the city budget, or how does it work with that?
Right, so I think where this is really powerful as a model is occupying that hinterland between what the state must do and private interest. And so you're never going to have crowdfunding do the bollards or the street curbs or strategic investments in opening up a new neighborhood.
Like do a bridge or something, right?
Bridges, so this is...
Depends on the type of bridge.
Depends on the kind of bridge.
Okay.
And I think what crowdfunding can do is it can allow collaboration in that hinterland. And it can allow people to do added extra stuff that makes the city even better, which goes beyond what the state can do, what tax dollars can do. And it provides a model that allows people to do as much of that stuff as they want. And in that zone, which allows collaboration in civic space, we have the participation of the state and in citizens and business, so everybody's in it together, coming together to do these sorts of projects. And their participation varies on the nature of the project. For some people, they're absolutely passionate about doing something which improves the quality of their life in the neighborhood, less interested in perhaps building a bridge in West London where they're not living. And that's fine. Yeah,
and Mizah, interested in your perspective, like how, coming from where you are, how can this, the community engagement, the community organizing piece of crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, help address inequality? How can you, what are you seeing that works, or what are some of the things you can, advise?
Yeah, so I think in the work that we do as a non-profit design organization, and I think being in Singapore, whereby we do have a very strong and a very centralized government, right? And I just want to tap on what Chris mentioned just now about the quality of engagement, right? And I think it's also about asking the right type of questions, right? So we do not ask people, for example, would you like this? Or what would you like to have in your neighborhood? Mm-hmm. But besides that, we want to ask them, what would want to make you spend more time in this area? Right? As opposed to asking a whole wish list of questions, which is one of the main challenges that we tend to have whenever we go down and talk to people. And I think the more we do on the ground work, whether is it a pop-up ideas market or whether is it a coffee talk session with people, we do realize the power of how crowdsourcing can help supplement the data that we need and how we can then also reinforce the kind of information that we want to have. However, having said that, nothing beats going down and also creating a dialogue among people. I think it's not so much the what that people want, but it's more about the why that people would want to have this, which is a lot more important for us as designers or as architects to know in order to make a much more meaningful or much more superior design outcome. Yeah.
And Eve, your platform is for investors, but is there a way that it can, address this issue?
Well, I think the Jobs Act has given us 3 completely different tools to use, and people are using them in an extraordinary variety of ways. They are just securities laws. You can do many different things with them. You can raise money for small businesses, or for incubator startups, or for a very big company, or you can raise a loan fund for $50 million, or you can raise $100,000 for a small project. So I think the laws, these regulations themselves offer a variety of opportunities. But that's the way I see it. Unfortunately, I think many equity crowdfunding platforms are focusing on making money, not doing good, and sort of there's the rub, right? So how many...
Yeah, it depends what your intention is, right?
It depends what your intention is.
Right.
So there's many things you can do with it, but what's your intention? So I can use Title III regulation crowdfunding to help someone who's doing a very big project engage a smaller group of people and raise a little piece of money for that project. Or I could help someone raise $50 million for a loan fund to go out and buy, vacant properties all over the country to improve them. I think I'm at the tail end here. I'm less interested in or less involved in what a community wants. By the time a developer comes to me, they have already thought through what the community wants. They're already planning a project. So it's a little different.
Okay.
But at my end, I can use criteria to sift through those projects to make sure that we're always doing something good.
Right.
Can I just say something?
Yeah, jump
This
in.
equity question is what's been vexing me for a decade. When Citizen Investor and some of the others started out early in the U.S. In this space, and we really wanted to do some of these projects, and we ended up doing a couple on our own, and we couldn't figure out how to deal with the equity question. But I think it is a design issue. It's not. There's no fundamental. There's equity issues with the way we tax fund the same projects too. Right? There's nothing fundamental about crowdfunding that presents that question. So I think, for example, in some areas we've said, look, we won't. The project needs to be on our list of projects at some point. We won't simply allow any crowdfunding project. But if the crowd raises funds for this tot lot in the wealthiest neighborhood of the city, that's great, and we will build it. We will not start construction on it until we have the tax dollars available to pay for the similar facility in the poorest part of the city. So it's contributing to the overall resource base, but we're saying, look, the sequencing has to work too. So you still have a vested interest in the success of the overall taxing system to fund those projects. In other cases, we've tried essentially a tax on the look. If this tot lot's going to cost us $28,000 or more likely $200,000, but if you raise $225,000. Then we'll build the tot lot, and 25 will go into this tot lot that we need in a different part of the city. So I think that we've been looking for partners that will help us think through these issues, and give us enough ability to tune and design the system together, and not simply have it either be completely within government or completely outside of government, in order to jointly try to tackle some of these equity challenges from a design perspective at the outset. I do worry about this I think hidden equity question, is that government is about both goods and bads. So yes, I am deciding where the farmers market's going to go and where the community garden's going to be, and everyone wants to participate in that. At the same time, I also have to decide where is the cattle rendering plant going to go, or the waste recycling facility, or the prison, or the methadone clinic, or the homeless shelter, and things that people do not want in their community. At least to this point, I haven't seen a crowdsourcing solution to that problem. And I do worry about hollowing out the capacity of government, because today, when if I have to do a homeless shelter in a neighborhood, I will often say, you know what, we're going to put a homeless shelter there, we're also going to put the tot lot there. That's the neighborhood that's going to get the tot lot.
The tot lot, what's that?
The playground for infants and toddlers, for toddlers essentially. So it's a playground. So I need both tools. I need the goods in order to achieve community buy-in and neighborhood buy-in for things that they might not otherwise want to have.
Right.
And so I worry a little bit about completely separating those out and taking all the good stuff and saying that's a non-governmental process, so that all I'm left with in a democratic system of government is the worst things that nobody wants, that's a recipe for eroding both the capacity, the effectiveness, and trust in government. Again, it's a solvable problem, but I do think it's essential that you don't lose sight of the impact of what we're doing on democratic institutions when we kind of parcel out just the babies and the bunnies and the fun stuff.
So I'm going to ask one or two more questions, and we're going to take some questions from the audience. I'm curious, like, how can we? What do you think are the barriers for this crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, growing and involving more people and doing it in the right way? Like, we want it to grow, but also carry forward like some of the social benefits that we see today, but not that might get lost if things scale unless we're very intentional.
I mean, I don't know that you can ever stop that. I think these are just tools that we have, and some people are going to use them very creatively to do really interesting things, and some are not. And I don't know that you can stop that. The question is, how much can you grow the interesting piece of it? The biggest barrier, I think, right now is just that it's a tiny little niche market that not many people are aware of. And the faster that people understand the tools that are out there and the platforms that are out there, I think the faster it's going to grow.
Right. Anyone want to offer a counterpoint to that? Is there a way that we can make this grow in a way that's healthy?
I mean, from my perspective, I think that there are lots of challenges involved in making our kind of crowdfunding for civic projects work. You know, you've got to integrate the mayor's money with the crowd, and you've got to have those things sync up over the right timeframes. You've got to de-risk the projects through a verification process. You've got to marry city strategy with the anarchy of crowdfunding and make sure that that combination works really well. And so there have been a lot of things to figure out, and I think we're probably emerging from the early stages of figuring out some of those hardest things. So it should now start to scale, and I think we are seeing it start to scale in the UK. But some of the things that you mentioned there about getting the balance right between strategic leadership and the involvement of the citizen through this sort of mechanic is going to be, you know, one of the things that we need to get right in order for this to really sing. Because we don't want this to cannibalize the ability of mayors to provide leadership and vision and direction for a place. That's not what this is about. It's about being complementary. And so we need to find that balance. And we're also going to need, as this scales, to make sure, coming back to some of the points we discussed earlier, about equity, that this open marketplace for civic improvement, where we suddenly have a lot more ideas, a lot more funding being mobilized to improve the city, does actually produce a socially just city as well as a physically better one, which improves quality of life and the local economy in areas where those projects are delivered.
Mizah, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, looking at crowdfunding and crowdsourcing, we do know that there's a certain population that might not have access to the internet. And I think that is something that has to be addressed, both online and also offline methods of doing crowdsourcing. And I think the next step would be, I'm sure there are a lot more experience than I am in terms of crowdsourcing and crowdfunding, in terms of the experience of doing such a transaction within the whole system online.
We've got about 12 minutes left. Who would like to ask a question? Okay, we have someone right here in the front.
Thank you for sharing this interesting topic. It's relatively new for me. That's why, if I may, I would like to ask two related questions. The first, I wonder what are the preconditions for this crowdsourcing approach to be working? Specifically, whether this requires a certain level of income per capita, for example, because Singapore, London, or UK, or US are already developed in the level of income per capita. The second question, Ms. Speaker mentioned many times about investment. Whether these crowdsourcing contributors do get their money back. If that is the case, whether the projects have to be profitable. So
okay,
these are the
great.
questions.
Yeah, so what are the preconditions, and can you get your money back?
From our perspective, about 80% of our projects are actually delivered in more deprived areas. That's not by design, that's just the way that it's happened. Now, deprivation in the UK is not the same as deprivation in some other countries, but I think this approach actually doesn't gravitate, interestingly, towards the very wealthy areas, because those places tend to have a less developed sense of community, interestingly. They are more atomized. People live more individual lives. Where this works is in places where there is a strong sense of cohesion and community, and they can be quite deprived areas, actually. And the second point to make on this is that there's actually no dogma about online, right? So you don't have to do all this online. Online is just a helping hand. It's a way of aggregating resource more efficiently than shaking a tin and going around and having conversations sometimes. But a lot of our projects also do lots of on-the-ground engagement and events and get people to come along. And in areas that are more deprived, sometimes you have a bit more digital exclusion. Not as many people are online. And so that combination can work really well. And I think if you get that mix right, you can have both the local engagement, but you can also have a facility where local people can share ideas and draw down on resource that would otherwise be very hard to access from the municipality, big business foundations, and so on. So I think that this is a model that can work both in advanced countries and advanced economies, but also in developing countries. You can imagine a really exciting incarnation of this approach, where as a result of that entrepreneurial local activity, these people could be drawing down on resource not just nationally, but internationally to help them fulfill their goals.
So I'm going to argue with him a little bit. But
Yes!
because what I'm doing is really vastly different than what Chris is doing. And I'm using American securities laws, which prescribe very particular things. So in order for us to take investments from anyone over the age of 18, we actually must do it online. It is a part of the regulation that all transactions are electronic only. We cannot talk to investors. So that particular type of crowdfunding is relying on technology and social media. So it actually precludes talking to people. It's a very odd thing. So again, I think there are so many different ways to do this that on our platform, because it is real estate and it's equity or an investment platform, we really treat the projects much like a bank will. We do our due diligence and make sure that they look viable before we post it, because it's our reputation at stake. We want our investors to at least get their money back and hopefully more. Again, with regulation crowdfunding, the one that permits anyone to invest, the regulation actually requires us to make sure that the developer has a complete business plan. So there are different, depending what you're using again, the requirements are different. Mm-hmm. Sorry to be confusing.
No, that's good. Thank you, Eve. Yeah, and we have translation up here, so you can, if you can ask a question in Korean, of course. So let's see. Let's go to this gentleman here. Yes, you, right there. Yeah.
Oh, hi. I'm an architect from New York. I have a question about crowdsourcing design. In my experience, when we do community meeting, let's say in New Jersey, many people tend to think very traditionally. So if we include all of the design thinking into our design, it ends up being a park that was designed a century ago. They always want something very historical, something that has been done or seen before. How do we get past beyond that? Just look at the IMP Museum in Paris, right? Everyone hated it when doing the planning phase, but when it opened, everyone loved it. How do we get people to think innovatively in a big group like what you're dealing with?
I don't think you can. I really don't think you can. Think about what Steve Jobs said. People don't know what they want if they haven't seen it. Okay? If they've seen it, they understand it, and they think that's what they want. It's probably what you deal with all the time. So I think that if you want to do something new and innovative, there's a very, very small percentage of the population that are early adopters and understand that. And the majority of the population, if you look at a bell curve, are up here. They will wait. They're a little more conservative. They want to understand it. They want to have seen it before, just like the banks I talked about. So I don't think you can solve that easily.
Okay.
This is why we don't do architecture design review in town hall meetings and that sort of thing. Because really, the more important thing is how does the city make you feel? Right. That's the more fundamental question. I think a lot of the questions that you're asking around, what would make you spend more time here, if you can say, and some of the VR and AR possibilities for helping people to experience other places and just give gut reactions. In my city, we're trying to drive towards more casual, frequent, intuitive feelings about places and place types, rather than focusing on, here's a very specific project on a very specific parcel, what do you think about that? Because we do always get that rear view mirror point of view around that planning decision. But then we have to be able to, at least in the US, it's almost impossible, even once you decide you're going to do that, to actually do it. Because you're required by law, as you know in New Jersey, to keep asking over and over and over again. And as an architect, if you imagine, for you, if you design something, and then you submit for the blueprints, and it's under construction, and we're still asking people, what is your opinion? All the way through at that point. At some point, you have to decide, this is what we're doing. Yeah. Now let's go do it. Okay, we've decided as a community, this is where we're going, let's go make that happen. And so part of I think of the point for me at least, of the crowd is to get better at that question. We typically just skip right over that to the project by project by project by project. We really need to be investing clearly in what is the end goal, what's the fundamental kind of feeling, kind of place that our citizens want to experience, and then we get out and act to make it happen.
Yeah, there is no good design by consensus. I just don't think it exists.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that, and I totally agree with the panelists. So in the work that we do, that's where the role of the creative is extremely important. And I think we always believe that for people, we see them as local experts, meaning they know their environment, what works well for them, what doesn't work well for them. But then you have the creative, the experts, the design experts. And we always believe that this two needs to come into collaboration to create something a lot more meaningful. So it's not so much expecting people to come up with creative ideas, because that's extremely difficult to kind of happen. But it's about the local experts and the design experts coming together to then create something a lot more superior and a lot more meaningful than that.
Yeah, I want to ask a kind of a pushback question though, right? I mean, does this get us into Starchitect territory? I mean, do we start prioritizing these bright, shiny, sometimes very expensive projects over basic needs of the citizens?
Well, I just, Pittsburgh just had a really interesting process with Gel Design on a very difficult street downtown that is just not working well for pedestrians. And instead of focusing on design, they focused on all the questions about what the street should be, what people wanted it to be, where they were uncomfortable on the street, what would make them feel more comfortable. And I think that speaks exactly to what Christopher is saying. It was much more discussion around usage than end design.
Right, the vision instead of
And I think everyone felt very satisfied that they had been asked about how they use the street. And I don't think really we're concerned about whether they're involved in, deciding exactly what it looks like.
Yeah, like the color of the paint or something like that.
I think it was a very good process.
Yeah. Cool, all right, more questions. We've got about 2 minutes left. All right, this gentleman here, the purple, had his hand up before.
Hi, Mark Thomas from New Zealand, now living in Singapore. I'm just interested if we could talk about technology and specific technological applications you're familiar with, whether it's an app or using the technology we're familiar with in a different way as a means of activating crowdsourcing. So I'm not just talking about sending out emails or email newsletters. Are you personally familiar, or in your businesses or in your council, are you using technology in a different way that's been more effective than in the past?
One thing that I think at this summit, we're going to be looking at possibly doing, which is this Zen City thing, which we'll talk about later, which is looking at what's happening, what people are already saying in their social media channels and through their other, that's geolocated, that will allow us to more effectively assess what's happening in specific places. But the other toy that we're playing with at the moment is this little thing that we've created this, we in the city of Santa Monica, also in California, are both experimenting with it, which is essentially a Tinder for cities. That allows us to say, okay, I'm standing at the corner of 5th and Main, and up pops a picture, and that picture is a picture of a 12-story building with a coffee house in the bottom and cars parked in front of it. For that place, and the only question is swipe left or right, if that feels right for that place. It's a 2-second interaction. But encoded in that picture for us is, okay, that's this level of density, this is this kind of parking regulation, this is this sort of zoning, all embedded in that picture. We show different pictures for different people. We collect enough data over time, over a number of people. We're able to get to essentially reverse engineer preferences around our choices around zoning and parking regulations and everything else, based on their preferences expressed around what they want the place to look and feel like. And I think the combination of creating alternative realities through that kind of an approach, the analytics approach, and having people express through actions, like crowdfunding as one example, you're starting to blend a new set of tools that together can give you a much deeper insight into what citizens are really hoping, fundamentally, for their community to be like.
All right, we're at time. I encourage you to engage the panelists with questions through the course of the rest of the conference. And check out their projects, look at their bios. If you want a copy of Shareable's new book, Sharing Cities, Activating the Urban Commons, come talk to me. I can get you a review copy. And let's give the panelists a hand.
And you too.
Thank you.